Why do you apologize for simply existing? Why do you shrink when someone raises their voice? Why do you smile when something inside you is screaming? You call it personality. You call it being chill. You call it maturity. But what if it's none of that? What if it's your childhood still living inside you? What if the fear you feel today isn't about the situation in front of you, but about a moment from decades ago you never fully left? Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And that's what you've done. You've called your trauma normal. You've called your hyper-independence strength. You've called your emotional silence discipline. But it wasn't. It was survival. You became what you had to become to be safe. But now, you're still playing by those rules, long after the danger is gone. You avoid conflict, not because you're wise, but because you grew up in a house where disagreement meant punishment. You struggle with love, not because you're broken, but because affection always came with conditions. You can't say no, not because you're generous, but because boundaries were never allowed. And now you're wondering why nothing ever feels right. You think you're making choices, but you're not. You're reacting to a father who never saw you, to a mother who only loved you when you performed, to silence you mistook for safety. Every relationship you enter, you're not really in it. Your inner child is, trying to fix what was broken, trying to be enough this time, trying to not be abandoned again. But love doesn't heal wounds. It exposes them. And that's what hurts. Because deep down, you still crave what you never got. The approval, the protection, the permission to just be. You weren't allowed to feel angry, so now you suppress it until it erupts. You weren't allowed to rest, so now you only feel worthy when you're exhausted. You weren't allowed to say no, so now you say yes and hate yourself for it. Jung believed that the child you once were never disappears. They live on, in your fears, in your patterns, in your voice that shakes when you try to speak your truth. You don't need more motivation. You need to grieve, not because you're weak, because the child inside you is still waiting for someone to finally say, "You didn't deserve that." You keep asking, "Why do I feel this way?" But you never ask, "Who taught me to feel this way? Who made you believe your worth was something to earn? Who made you think silence was safer than honesty? Who told you your needs were too much?" These voices didn't disappear. They just moved in. Now they speak through your self-doubt, your overthinking, your constant guilt. You apologize for taking space, for needing help, for having feelings, because somewhere along the way, You learned that being loved meant being less loud, less messy, less you. Jung said, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. And now you carry it. The unlived rage of your father, the unloved child your mother once was, the trauma that started long before you were born. But none of it was yours. You just inherited the silence. Now you wear it like it's your skin. But silence isn't peace. It's memory. And your body remembers what your mind buried. That scream you never let out. That truth you weren't allowed to say. It's still in you, waiting. You think you remember your childhood, but memory lies, not to protect the truth, to protect you. Because if you saw it clearly, you'd break. You'd see the moments you explained away, the yelling you called discipline, the neglect you called independence, the fear you called respect. But it wasn't love. It was control. You learned to behave so you wouldn't be hurt, to succeed so you wouldn't be ignored, to smile so they wouldn't ask questions. And now you smile when you're anxious. You work when you're falling apart. You give even when you have nothing left. Not because it's noble, because it's familiar. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you bring the darkness to light, you will never be free." But freedom isn't found in healing quotes. It's found in shaking hands, in ugly cries, in saying, "That wasn't okay," even if no one else agrees, because no one else has to. This is between you and the child inside, still sitting on that bed, still waiting to be held, still asking, "Was it my fault?" You know the answer. Now say it out loud. It wasn't your fault, but they made you carry it like it was. They blamed you for being sensitive, for asking too much, for reacting like a child when you were a child. They taught you to internalize their failure. So now, every time something goes wrong, you blame yourself. Not because it's true, because it's familiar. You overthink every word. You replay every moment. You apologize for existing before anyone even complains. That's not humility. That's trauma. And it's deep. It shows up in your relationships, in your silence, in your panic when someone gets too close. Because closeness once meant danger. It meant expectations. It meant being seen, and still not being enough. Carl Jung said, "In each of us, there is another whom we do not know. And that other is the version of you who never got to speak. The one who was told, 'Get over it. Stop crying. You're too emotional. So you got quiet. You got strong. You got numb. But you didn't get free. And freedom only starts when that child finally speaks. I'm still here. That's what the child says when you finally sit in silence long enough to hear. Not broken, not weak, just forgotten. You built your life around avoiding their voice. Distractions, performance, productivity. You thought if you became successful enough, strong enough, quiet enough, they'd disappear. But they never left. They waited. Through every relationship, every panic attack, every night you couldn't sleep but didn't know why. You thought the pain was about now. It's not. It's a scream from the past you never let out. A truth you swallowed so they'd love you. Carl Jung believed the parts of ourselves we reject don't die. They grow in the dark. And that's what's happened. You didn't lose your inner child. You locked them away. But they never stopped hoping you'd come back. That one day you'd stop pretending, stop performing, stop healing for show, and start healing for real. That you'd sit down, look them in the eye, and say, I believe you. I'm sorry they didn't, but I do. That's how it begins. They didn't break you. You broke yourself to fit inside a world that couldn't handle your truth. That's the lie they never told you directly. They just made you live it. You became easy to manage, predictable, pleasant. You shut down before they could reject you. You smiled before they could question you. You overachieved so they'd overlook your pain. It worked. They loved the version of you that didn't need too much. But that version is dying because you can only hide your real self for so long before the body starts to rebel. The anxiety, the burnout, the disconnection. It's not random. It's the price of living in contradiction. Carl Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And yet, that's exactly what the child inside you needs. Not perfection, not success, not applause, just for you to stop leaving them behind. Because every time you abandon your truth to keep others comfortable, you tell that child, you don't matter. But they do. And they're still waiting for you to prove it. You think healing is becoming someone new, but it's not. It's remembering who you were before the world told you who to be, before the fear, before the guilt, before you learned to flinch every time someone raised their voice. You weren't born numb. You were made numb. By moments no one else remembers. but your body never forgot. You weren't born afraid to speak. You were taught that your truth made people uncomfortable. So you stayed quiet. You became agreeable. You called it mature. But it wasn't maturity. It was adaptation, a child's defense in an adult's world. Carl Jung believed that healing is a confrontation, not with others, but with the self you've buried. And now it's time to let the buried voice rise. Time to let that child sit at the table again, not as a memory, as a guide. They know where the pain is. They know what you truly needed. They know who you were before shame rewrote your story. So ask them. Ask, what did you need that you never got? And this time, don't ignore the answer. What did you need that you never got? The answer comes quietly. I needed safety. I needed to be heard. I needed someone to stay. I needed to be loved without conditions. Simple things. But when you don't get them as a child, you spend your whole life chasing echoes. You call it ambition. You call it love. You call it independence. But really, you're just searching for what you should have received for free. Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And that's what you've done. You've built routines, relationships, entire careers, just to avoid one simple truth. You were hurt. Not in dramatic, cinematic ways, but in quiet, everyday betrayals. The kind that shape you without ever raising a hand. And now you see it. Not as blame, not as bitterness, but as clarity. The story wasn't your fault, but the healing, that's yours now. Because the only way out is not through effort. It's through honesty. And finally, you're ready for it. You're not broken. You're carrying too much for someone who was never meant to carry any of it. Your anxiety isn't weakness. It's memory. Your triggers aren't flaws. They're unhealed signals. Your numbness isn't failure. It's fatigue from decades of pretending you're fine. But you're not pretending anymore. You stopped running. You stopped performing. You stopped calling survival strength. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now, you're becoming. Not the person they wanted, not the mask you wore, not the wound you protected. You're becoming whole. And wholeness doesn't look perfect. It looks like truth. It sounds like honesty. It feels like finally being home in your own body. This is what healing is. Not escape. Return to the child, to the truth, to you. What's one belief from your childhood that still controls your life today? Be honest. Write it in the comments. Your truth might unlock someone else's.